Mental health has got to be one of the most important topics that we should be speaking about right now. Anxiety and depression are as much of an epidemic as anything else. And we've asked Marc, a clinical psychologist and one of my dearest friends, to come in and chat with us about how we should be looking after our heads in this time of crisis and chaos. Recording, there we go. Right. Marc Rogatschnig, my dear friend, we've been buds since when? I think we were teenagers, dude.
Like the 90s, the good decade.
It was about 10 years ago. It was about 5 years ago. Right?
We were toddlers.
Exactly. But now, Marc, we're normally sitting at a coffee shop, in Constantia, by like a coursing stream and in the bathed in sunlight. And this is a very different reality for the two of us, dude. And I just wanted to touch base on, first of all, how are you doing? How are things in the Rogatschnig household? And just to touch upon what it's like for the entrepreneurs and the people that you're speaking to with specific reference to mental health and their well-being, their mental well-being.
Yeah, Fred, thank you. I mean, these are certainly very different times, but thankfully we're still in touch. And one of the observations I've made in the last week is I'm actually oftentimes have been more in touch with people in the last week than maybe over the last few months. It's not face to face, but I've been in the comms and seeing their faces and actually being let into their homes. I've been let into more people's homes this week than I think I have in the last 5 years. And that's, a curious, interesting upside, I think, of this whole period of time. Our family are good. We've been very careful to not, create panic in our children and trigger them with scaremongering and scary stories of this virus. And we've done a lot to gather information that is useful for the family. And then we've created wonderful rhythms in our day to keep connected, to keep the work world for both my wife and I going, to keep the children engaged. Our own business has been, I suppose, decimated by this, but we're a low fixed cost business and have been very careful to build what initially we thought was a war chest, but was ultimately an emergency fund that is going to help us survive. And a big lesson from the financial crisis in 2008, 2009 was exactly that, was don't get caught out in these times with an overextended amount of bad debt and a sort of an appetite for continuous growth that keeps you like 30 to 40 days away from losing a lot of what you've built. I've reached out to numerous people, clients, friends, but particularly clients actually who are in businesses, some of which are their very own businesses, some of who are sitting in large organizations. And I'm finding two different types of people. One group, I think you mentioned this in a note the other day. Some people are just sort of doing nothing, kind of in an existential kind of moment of self-reflection and bathing in this time of nothingness. And others are panicking. Others are facing an existential threat, not an existential reflective time. And there lies the sort of the balancing act that I think people are having. So many of those that are on the edge of facing some major survival challenge are already struggling to sleep, are finding their emotions right at the surface. I've already been called to just help diffuse some of the explosions that have happened, to help people identify the triggers that are going to emerge in moving forward, to not catastrophize every event. That's happened a lot this week, to help entrepreneurs particularly not catastrophize and make everything seem like a crisis when it isn't. I suppose the big question I'm sitting with, and a lot of my colleagues and I are talking about is what are the mental health ramifications of this over the next 6 months? And how do we almost kind of help people build the coping strategies so that whatever happens, even if it's worst case scenario, they don't collapse into mental disorder that makes everything worse. Because what we know is beyond these crises, there is a very rapid increase in suicide, for example. We want to be thinking about how do we help incubate people from that now. And so, that's kind of, I sit in a very comfortable place, having curated an environment around me that is calm, that is, it's minimized the inputs from the outside world, particularly the media. I've got people I love who are dear and near to me, and I'm spending time with them in a sort of a rhythm and a practice that maintains the calm. But I'm also then, watching from the comfort of my own home, other people on the other side of a screen who are in deep, deep distress, and trying to work out how do we support those people, which is, I think, what the purpose of your work is.
Mm.
I don't think I answered anything there, but I think I gave a sense of the way that
that's hugely helpful, Mr. Marc. I love the way you articulate the broad strokes of the challenge at hand. And I think if we look at, I just want to talk about some of the symptoms and the surprising effects, for example. One of the preconceptions that I had to 21 days was, like, I'm going to get some time to relax and reflect and so on. But I do not think that I have ever in my life worked as hard as I have over the past week. It's been crazy. I've worked like 100 hours plus. And obviously my role is right, and particularly my platform is right in the thick of this in terms of supporting SMEs and entrepreneurs and business owners across South Africa. But, the reality is I've not had a break, and I think also, who knew that Zoom would become the most important tool in my arsenal of tools, And just Zoom alone, it's quite a thing getting used to it, right? These are things that we're adapting to. Can you talk a little bit into that and what that means?
A colleague shared with me this morning. He said when this 21 day started, he had this false sense that maybe this was a time for New Year's resolutions. It's like after these 21 days, so I'm going to be a new person, and I will have got rid of this habit and introduced this one. And he said after 1 week, he's bitterly disappointed in himself. And I think we've probably all done that. We've kind of gone, whoa, 21 days. I don't have to do this, but I have to stay at home. So I think there's a lot baked into this context right now. And I'm certainly feeling it myself. It's a mix of emotions and what is expected of me in this time. Should I be working? How much should I be working? What do my family need? How long will this be? Is it 21 days? Is it going to be 31 days? I think there's so many unanswered questions. And so we have at least the opportunity to connect with people via Zoom, for example. I think what's happening though, and I'm the same as you, I think we're being overwhelmed by Zoom commitments. And the environmental impact is that I'm not moving around. I'm connecting with other people, but I'm often just sitting in the same place all day long. And if I'm not careful, unfortunately, I have some rhythms that we've kind of put into place, but I can see how some people can be incredibly sedentary and are connecting with all kinds of people, but there is this underlying stress to I'm not moving around, I'm not getting the fresh air I probably would like, I'm not getting the breaks I normally get between things to go and kind of goof off and have a laugh with someone at the coffee station. I'm also worried about the technology. I'm stressed out about whether this thing's going to kind of shut down on me mid-sentence. I'm hoping people understand what I'm trying to say. I've got things to say, but there's so many people on the call. Will people give me the space to say them? I'm on so many calls. What happens to the rest of the work I need to do? Now that people think I'm always available, why am I working 8-hour days? And is that what was expected of us? So I think the boundaries around this new way, not new way, but this sort of accelerated way of connecting are not clear.
And we're making up the rules as we go along.
Yeah,
right?
it's a bit like cell phones. I've often thought, it's incredible. You'll be in a conversation with someone, their cell phone goes off. They don't even say sorry anymore. It's like grab the phone, answer it. Now, in any other context, that would never happen. you'd never allow somebody to come diving into a conversation you're having with someone and just kind of push you aside and then start a conversation. We'd go, whoa, excuse me, like I'm having a conversation here. Can't you wait? Or this is, hi, this is Fred. Like, it's good to see you. And so I think even there, the boundaries, we're just not clear on common courtesies and how we do this. And so that adds a level of stress. And it's everything, like the kids in the background. It's like the noises, and it's other people's kids in the background, their noises, and I can't hear properly. All of these just raise a sort of performance anxiety, I think. Well, it certainly does in me. And I go, geez, is my background okay? Like, can people see me? Is the light too bright? Little things that are small concerns around how you show up and how you perform. And then, of course, man, if I'm not in a Zoom call, are people going to think I'm not working? And you know, and I'm just chilling by the pool, you know. So all of these things are loaded on top of us. And then at the same time, we've got this very real crisis. You know, the Greeks describe the word crisis, krisis. It was the moment when somebody that is diseased was either going to make it or might die. That moment when you weren't sure if they were going to make it or were going to die from a disease is what the Greeks called a crisis. And I can't think of any time in my own life where we've actually been in a true crisis in the truest meaning of the word. And that's that threat to our own physical health and the economic, financial, societal health has come at us at so many different levels. We're not talking about that enough. We're talking about unprecedented times. We're talking about how are you doing, how are you feeling. But what we're not talking about is that everybody at some point in their day is experiencing three things because we designed this way, and we all know it: fight, flight, and freeze. We are all, and it's our, you know, mammalian brain going, man, you know, in a few months, in a few weeks, in a few days, I could either be facing real death, or I could be facing the more imagined death of my business or my work or my job. But all of them are existential threats, and the behaviors that emerge when you're in that state of survival are usually unsympathetic and low in empathy. And so we have lots of connection where we sort of, you know, talking via a camera, but we're not surrounded by people. And so the loneliness levels rise, our sense of empathy and being cared for, you know, we don't feel as much of that. And we're all kind of in it for ourselves, trying to do our best. And it's exhausting and it's unsustainable. So you know, I'm being asked regularly at the moment, come and speak to my people. Can you do a Zoom call and tell my people to be more courageous? That was the most recent one. Help them be more brave. Could you just share with them an inspirational story? Tell them what it takes to get through a crisis. And my first response always is, that's not my role. The most important person right now in an organization who's got the most rank and power and who's got the most likely chance of creating a sense of stability is the primary leader. So if your primary leader is not sharing the inspirational stories, if your primary leader is not doing one thing, and that is building focus, it's kind of the fourth F. It's the antidote to freezing, fleeing, and fighting. If they're not creating focus, if they're not naming the crisis, creating a project, a mission out of it, then no one else is going to, in an organizational context, be able to help people find their courage, simply because there's very little we can predict moving forward. It is unpredictable, unknown, and as a result, we are just being triggered every day into these responses, and we look for anybody with authority that can give us a sense of consistency, of simplicity, something we can hold on to. And that fundamentally is what entrepreneur leaders are being challenged to do right now. They're not being challenged to outsource this to somebody like me, to come and talk about very theoretical, cerebral things. They're actually wanting to hear from their leader who goes, this is how much money we have under these circumstances. This is where we're going. And these are the 3 things I need you to focus on, even when you're at home. And every day I'm going to communicate with you. And I'm going to have a one-on-one with each one of you over the course of the next 10 days. And I want to do that regularly. And I want you to feel like we're in something together, rather than having a stranger come in and tell you how you could be more courageous. So I think what I'm saying is some people are still trapped in they're frozen. They're trying to run away from it as entrepreneurs and leaders. And what their people need them to do is they need them to build focus. And as a result, some momentum behind that focus. And they need to be doing it all themselves, which is exhausting. So you're talking about 100-hour weeks. That's the price at the moment. The big decision that has to be made at some point by all entrepreneurs and leaders is when they need to decide when this crisis is over as well. So oftentimes I will work with teams that are in crisis, and the crisis is long gone, but the behaviors of the crisis are still there. And it's quite addictive, you know. It's like you get addicted to the high pace, to the autocratic leadership style, to the fast decision making. You get quite addicted to always being on, always being busy. Our cortisol levels are just like spiking all the time. We are almost running on adrenaline. And then the crisis has passed, and we're not stopping to review what did we learn. We're not stopping to think about where to next. We're just in the state of being. And so the big decision of, guys, the crisis is done, has to be made by the leader. And oftentimes that's when I'm sitting with teams going, so when are you going to decide that the crisis of a year ago is actually no longer with us? And people often haven't even thought of that. They're like, what? Geez, you're right. I mean, we've just have not adjusted to the adjustment in the context. So, you know, the mental health of an entrepreneur is to be in tune with the way that they're being triggered in survival. Then to own the leadership role that they need to own, even if it's over one person, even if it's over their family, but definitely over a larger workforce. And they need to create momentum towards a very focused set of visible, tangible, points and priorities. And then ultimately they need to go, I think we're done, peeps. I think this is over. Another point is, this is not the time to be teaching people a whole lot of stuff. My analogy is, at the moment, this crisis is a bit like watching a car accident happening in slow motion. Like, we know it's not good.
I've actually used that same analogy a few times this week. It does feel a little bit like that. It's just this grinding crash of metal, you know?
Like a Jerry Bruckheimer movie where everything's in slow motion. You see it from all different angles, and it's kind of all coming together. And the thing is, when anybody arrives at a car accident, and I've been the first arriver at a head-on collision myself, the last thing you're thinking about is pulling out the rule book on the rules of the road and going to the driver of both vehicles and telling them, listen, next time you're in this situation, this is how you should have been driving. Could you not see that the speed limit is 100? No one does that. And so what I'm seeing is too much trying to teach people stuff at the moment, rather than supporting them to focus on a handful of priorities and to feel confident that you've got this as the leader, as the person in charge, and not to overwhelm them with hundreds of articles. And I've seen it just like flowing around everything, around what you're feeling, what you should be feeling, how you could be dealing with this. Some famous person who's doing it, an amazing blogger who wrote that. It's overwhelming, and we know that the mammalian brain undermines your cognitive functioning. So if you had to do a test on people post this sort of last couple of weeks, what do you remember about what you've read and been told? It'll be a short little list. And so we need to remember that when we communicate, let's not over communicate and overload people to raise their anxiety levels again, because that's exactly what happens.
Dude, this is exactly why I love speaking with you, because you have a way of clarifying such complicated and multifaceted, very nuanced challenges into a way that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, if I just, there's so many good points there, but from my perspective, if I can I mean, I'll just to extrapolate, you know, you know, this idea of focus is such an important one. You know, the reality is people have been either, as we mentioned, freeze, you know, they just kind of sit like, you know, with the deer in headlights eyes, or it's been so frenetic and running around trying to offer as many things and trying to throw as much spaghetti at the wall as possible. And focus is such a powerful thing, because if you do that, it just galvanizes your team. It gets people into this flow and this rhythm, and it makes people more motivated to do the work, even if they're at home, because they have a purpose. They've got something they can do, and they're not going to go into a cortisol spike and completely burn out, you know?
Maybe one very simple practice that I think could help everyone. And I actually want to use two words you've just used, which I'm going to now steal. You spoke about frenetic versus flow. And, you know, I think from a leadership perspective, you've got the choice. Do you want to create people around you that are frenetic, or do you want to create people around you that are in flow? It's beautiful. And I think as an individual, every morning through this crisis, you've got to decide, do you want to approach the world with frenetic energy, or do you want to try and find a state of flow? And I suppose in any context, no matter where you're living, who you're living with, the practice of doing a sort of a mind and body sweep for 10 minutes before your day begins is probably becoming more and more useful and important now than ever before. We would often recommend that somebody wakes up in the morning and just gathers their thoughts. You know, what has percolated overnight? What are they expecting in the day ahead of them? Would they like to just think about how they'd like to show up, be deliberate about proactively engineering the way they will face this day? That's always been a very powerful practice that many very effective people will use. I think in this context, we could all do that better, because the triggers to our sort of emotional spikes are coming at us the moment we wake up and we have a look at a news item and it says more deaths, or it says problems with the lockdown, or the economy's just shrunk by this much, or the rand has plummeted. What's happening is we're having all of these emotional spikes. And if we don't deal with that before we go into our first coffee with our husband, partner, wife, or into our first meeting, call in this case, what we do is we let those things leak into our day. And so a healthy practice is identify a handful of questions. Something like, what is on my mind right now that I feel is dominating my thinking too much? And a next question could be, you know, how do I intend to show up today? Or what would success look like at the end of my Friday? You know, today, if I'd done it this morning. To think of 3 to 4 questions that name how you're feeling, and then a handful of questions that give you a chance to identify very deliberately how you would like to show up and how you'd like your day to be remembered as a day that you would be proud of. If we did that, we would end up in every meeting far more aware of, firstly, our own personal triggers and how we might be up and down. We might even be able to communicate to people and say, listen, today I'm feeling very raw, quite vulnerable. I just want you to know that. And so if this is going to be a really difficult meeting, I may just listen more than get involved, but that doesn't mean I'm not engaged. And so those are the sorts of, that's, I suppose, the simplest of practices. How people deal with stress and anxiety and the way they panic about different aspects of reality. You know, that's, individuals need to find individual strategies often to deal with that. But a good starting point is give yourself a chance to have the best possible day and make the best possible contribution. And I certainly can see when people start doing that, they always identify and unearth something that they didn't expect and that they know would have upended a portion of their day if they hadn't identified it, would have tripped them up at some point. So that's, I suppose that's the simplest strategy I could offer right now.
Mr. Marc, that's perfect. It's a perfect practical way to end off this interview. Thank you so much, my man. I always appreciate meeting with you. I look forward to our next coffee at Chardonnay Daily in Constantia, in the bright of the day. And but in the meantime, this will certainly do. Thank you so much for your contribution, my man.
Mental health is arguably more important now than it's ever been. I've asked Marc Rogatschnig, the dog barking and... Okay. 3, 2, 1. Mental health has... What did I say? Mental health has arguably never been as prevalent. Oh, these dogs. This is crazy. Mental health is arguably as much of an important... Dogs!
Pick him up. Take them outside, yeah?
No, bring them inside. They are barking. Yeah. Not inside to me, bring them inside into the house.
Oh, you let Coda, you let Knox go now.
Yeah. Mental health is one of the most important topics on our minds right now. We've asked Marc Rogatschnig, a clinical psychologist and a very dear friend of mine. Mental health is one of the most important topics on our minds right now. Anxiety and depression, much of it. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Mental health is one of the most important topics. Damn, dude. Okay. Mikhail, call the dogs. Mental dog barking. This is not ideal. Okay, 3, 2, 1.